Okay, welcome everyone for another series of Care for Rare webinar series. The reason why we are having these particular webinar series is to ensure that we provide a common platform for sharing the contents which are relevant for patient advocacy, education. And today we have one of the rare doctors with us, Dr. Eileen Kinimi, is a pediatrician, but who she is specifically trained in pulmonology, and she has more than 16 years of experience in handling respiratory diseases in kids, and she has completed her pulmonology and sleep medicine degrees from the prestigious National University Hospital, Singapore. And today she is going to talk to us about ventilation in kids in pediatric age group, which is such a contemporary and very important topic. And without ado, without any sort of delay, I request Dr. Eileen to talk to us. The request to the participants is if you have any questions, please keep it reserved to the end of the session. We will have question and answer session in the end. And please mute your microphones so that if you have any background noise, it doesn't affect the webinar. So Dr. Eileen, welcome and please take it over.
Okay, so I'd like to really thank the ORDI team, Mr. Prasanna, who I've known for maybe a good 11 or 12 years now. And I also thank the entire team that has brought everybody together here on this platform. It is really an honor and it is a privilege for me because I feel that, you know, we may blame the pandemic, but it has brought a lot of good things together. And I'm happy to be able to share my very humble experience with you all. So let us start with, I will start with a case scenario. And I also understand that there are a lot of parents who have logged in and as well as clinicians. So I'll try to kind of balance it. If I get too much of, clinical, it doesn't make sense. And also wanted to make it simple for my, patients and parents to also understand what we are trying to explain here. Okay. So we have this 14-year-old boy who has got Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. He's been wheelchair bound since the last 7 years. He's had a scoliosis surgery. Unfortunately for this boy, he's had 3 ICU admissions in the last 1 year. He's 14 years and 30 kgs. He has never had NIV or what we call home ventilation or non-invasive ventilation. He's never had any sleep studies. But the parents obviously are asking us, are we doing enough for this child? Currently, he is very short of breath. He has poor appetite. He's come into hospital for fever for 5 days. He's not able to feed well. He's excessively sleepy in the daytime. He can't sleep at night. And what happened to him was he had sleep. He had problems in his. He turned pale in his bathroom, and he had to be suctioned orally, and he was rushed to the emergency. And in the emergency, a cardiac scan was done, which showed a fairly good liver function. And his PFTs were also done, and he's also on some medications. He was resuscitated in the emergency room. He required oxygen, and he required high levels of oxygen, close to 50% on, and only with that he could maintain oxygen. And you can see his, a lot of tests were done. I'll not get into detail, but roughly to say he collapsed. He was brought to the emergency. Everybody is worried. Is it the heart? Is it the lung? What has happened to this boy? So we get an X-ray, and you can see on the right side. On the right side looks quite good. In the middle, you can see that this is a scoliosis surgery. So there is a big rod that has been placed here to straighten the spine out. And here, if you look at it, this part is the lung, right? This is the left side and this is the right side. So this part of the lung, there's something haziness and it looks very high. So there's something happening here. Okay, so is there some secretion stuck there? Is he having pneumonia because he came with fever? What is happening to this boy? Why did he suddenly turn pale, right? So what happens is we started on NIV, that is BiPAP, okay, and we started him on antibiotics, presuming that he had some infection, did some blood tests, and he dramatically improved. And by day 2 of admission, we had to shift him to the ward. when we was trying to suctioning him, there's a lot of mucus plugging, and then he desaturated again. Oxygen went down. So again, physiotherapy, suctioning, IV fluid, nebulizations, and thereafter we could discharge him on BiPAP. Okay, so we are sending him on a sort of a home ventilation, 2 hours off, 2 hours on, and at night, nocturnal, he's continuously using at night. And then we said, okay, let us follow up with a sleep study. X-ray was, the entire thing that had collapsed, all that was better, and we felt he was clinically stable to go home. Now, let's look at what really is important here. What really is, a few things that we need to understand. When we have problems with breathing or respiration, there is certain things that are controlling your central drive, your neuromuscular system, that's your nerve and your muscle system, which helps you breathe. And again, the load, airway mechanics means, are you having some pneumonia? Is it some infection, some secretion? Your lung, is it working as it should? Or other thoracic mechanisms? Are you having scoliosis? If there's some kind of, mechanism which is not allowing you to breathe. So if any of this goes off, this is where the balance tip off. So if too much load, no central drive, any of this can make us breathless and have difficulty in breathing, right? So we must understand that it has to do with muscle weakness, any kind of muscle that is involved with breathing, with swallowing. So you're not able to cough well, your secretions are stuck inside, you have a lot of pneumonias, a lot of collapse in the airway, your lung is not working as it should, your airway means you're not able to breathe out well, breathe in and out well, heightened ventilatory demands, especially when you have respiratory tract infection, and eventually all this will lead to respiratory failure. And most of the times, children give us time. Any disease, it gives us some time. It usually occurs first during sleep and then subsequently even in the daytime. So this is very, very important how it works, okay? So muscle weakness, just to put it briefly, we have muscles to help us in inspiration, we have muscles to help us in expiration, and bulbar muscles which control our swallowing, our speech. So if any of these muscles get affected, like you have children, when we say we have, like this child that I presented with DMD, it's a muscle issue, right? And hence we have problem with the muscles that are not working well. So I know this looks like a little complicated cycle, but let's just say this is a child with normal breathing, and this is a child somewhere here that we have landed up using our, okay, we're talking about home ventilation here. So this from here till here, what happens in between? Very, very, very important to know, okay? Like I said, are we having some muscle weakness? Are we having some neuromuscular problem like SMA, like DMD, like muscular dystrophy? Is there anything wrong with our lungs, right? So what do? We check, as doctors will check, are you having problems swallowing? Is there a problem with coughing? Are you having problem with sleep? We can ask you just about this much, right? As soon as problems begin, swallowing problem, should we be on tube feeding? Is the child having recurrent aspiration pneumonias coming to the hospital? Are we able to cough well? Is it a weak cough? Is it child not able to cough up properly? So again, pneumonias, collapsed lungs. So this is the problem here. Are we having problem with sleep? Most of us, when we sleep, we don't know. In the same way, most of us don't know what's happening in our sleep. But, this is the earliest signs that pick up, right? Some children also land up, because of all these muscle problems, we land up with scoliosis. The muscles are not strong, and hence our spine begins to bend in different ways, forward, backwards, most of this, right? So here we are, and we probably, if you see a doctor, we give you some antibiotics, we'll tell you maybe we should do some tube feeding, maybe we treat the pneumonia. And some of us who can reach centers where we have sleep studies tell you, let us do blood gas to check for carbon dioxide, let us do a sleep study to see what's happening. But this also becomes extremely important, but because ultimately when we pick up problems here, right, we know the child needs to go into NIV, the non-invasive ventilation at night, the home ventilation at night. And then later on, when the disease progresses, if it's a progressive condition, we know that we may need it not only at night, but also in the daytime. So this entire spectrum some of us parents here, patients here already have gone through it and very clearly understand what I'm talking about here. And it is really the crux of all that we are trying to do. Look at the type of patients. So we have patients who are dependent on ventilation for life support, right? Various conditions. Children who land up in the ICU with severe problems, right? But at the same time, there are some children who require for just healthy quality of life, to maintain their health, prevention of all these recurrent pneumonias, aspiration, the morbidities associated with it, and of course, it is the biggest killer, the number of duration of admissions into the hospital. Like this boy I presented, he'd already come to the ICU 3 times, and the parents were really exhausted because you have a lot of financial issues as well with each admission, and of course your quality of life is poor. So we have to find a way to help these kids. What are the types of home ventilation? We have the non-invasive, which I would put it as BiPAP, just for us to kind of register, which is basically a positive kind of pressure ventilation. Negative pressure, we're not using it currently, but NIV, essentially, most of us, either BiPAP or CPAP. Okay, I'll come in detail on this. And invasive ventilation is via tracheostomy. Okay, so this is very clear. Either we're doing it via tracheostomy or we're doing non-invasive, and most of the time, all of us are using BiPAP. Okay, how do we decide? We have to know what is really the degree of respiratory autonomy. Means, is the child able to take breaks, short breaks from this machine? Like this boy that I said, initially came into the ICU, and then later on, we were able to give him BiPAP breaks, right? What is the pathology? What is the problem? Is it in the airway? Is it in the lung? Is it in the nerve? Is it muscular? Is it a combination? Is it a problem with the central, in the brain, in the CNS? What is the age at which all these treatments have begun? What is the availability of equipment or the interfaces, the masks? What do we have? And of course, family, caregivers, financial status. There's a lot to be considered before we cannot simply put our child on home ventilation. We have to understand what is the need, how urgent, and what we must do. So when we talk about tracheostomy and invasive, most of these kids obviously are requiring support more than 16 hours in a day. Smaller children and infants who can't even tolerate very brief periods of the discontinuation. There are children with severe spinal cord injuries, various kinds of lung problems, neuromuscular, like our SMA infants who present very early, almost in the first 6 months of life. And there are other problems with, airway anomalies that are requiring this tracheostomy or invasive type of ventilation. So, when we talk about invasive, parents are so scared. The minute you tell them it's tracheostomy, it's invasive ventilation, no doctor, no hospital will do this unless it's absolutely needed, because it involves a lot of stress to the caregivers, it involves a lot of training, and hence we have to consider it properly. Okay, so let us look at what are the advantages that this tracheostomy and invasive ventilation is offering us. So you see this little cute kid with a tracheostomy, right? It's a secure airway. Okay, so in fact, when you're sending a child on tracheostomy, I would still feel quite comfortable, okay, because if the airway is open, access for airway clearance, suctioning, all that is also easy, and you're able to support the ventilation, whether it's high, low, whether the child gets any kind of respiratory, very severe pneumonias, we're able to adapt the ventilator settings, but we understand the burden is really tremendous for parents. The interface, okay, so children who need only the non-invasive ventilation, the BiPAP, who need support only during sleep, or they are using it at sleep in the day or the night, or they can tolerate long periods of the ventilator with no life-threatening events. Like I said, neuromuscular problems, any very bad restrictive lung, chronic lung, many other conditions. So I would say most of our patients do fall into this category where we can help them in a way that is technically feasible at home. Okay. So why are we opting for home ventilation? There are very clear-cut indications. We are helping with children's prolonging their survival, relieve all the breathlessness, difficulty of breathing, all the carbon dioxide oxygenation problems are getting normalized. Any sleep-related issues, like this boy, he was not able to sleep at night. He's quite restless, can't concentrate in the daytime. So these are all sleep related. His quality of sleep is bad. He's not able to concentrate. His carbon dioxide was going up, so he's having headaches. And of course, there is a condition called cor pulmonale. We are all aware of it, where it's a severe strain on the heart related issues. The child's daytime functioning. Let's say we have a 14-year-old boy who wants to attend school, right? And otherwise everything is fine, except that he feels extremely tired, fatigued, unable to concentrate. We're also helping the children to grow, develop in whatever ways feasible. And of course, we are awaiting if there's any respiratory failure, not gaining weight, recurrent pneumonias, aspiration, or the CO2 levels are rising. These are the reasons why you and I would consider home ventilation. Another important question why parents ask me is, why do we need sleep studies? So I showed you that long cycle, why we need sleep studies. In fact, most of our patients, we pick up problems very early with the sleep studies. And I would suggest some of them, when they come to us, we tell them, let's say we have a child with SMA who has come into the ICU 3 times, recurrent pneumonias, recurrent aspiration. The first thing most of us would do is a sleep study, because sleep study is one of the earliest parameters, if we do it well, to pick up all the problems, right? There are other things like lung functions. If a child is non-ambulant, the muscle weakness is really progressive, child never attained the ability to walk, all these infants with neuromuscular issues, obstructive sleep apnea, CO2 levels going high, any spinal issues, and of course, during BiPAP titration, after we start this home ventilation, these are the indications for sleep studies. And it's very, very important to know that we have few centers all over in India, and I know some of parents have actually flown to Bangalore to get this study done. But I would still say this would be an investment for your child to understand the degree of the problem. And there are so many parents who would come to us that, nobody told us about it. We were not sensitized about it. And it's not an easy test for some. It's not a cheap test for some. But at the same time, it is really a good investment for us also as doctors to give you, it's written on paper, like your child is having problems at night. The carbon dioxide levels are going up. The oxygen levels are going down. We need to start on home ventilation. So this is a great, and it's a gold standard diagnostic test for most of our patients. A word about oxygen. I have seen children with chronic, all these problems who come only with oxygen, right? They're just giving some oxygen at home and nothing else, and parents are quite satisfied, okay? But we must remember that when a child goes into chronic respiratory failure, even the central respiratory drive is affected, and we can worsen the CO2 levels. So any child who has severe oxygen hypoxemia, which we call, if it is related to especially the neuromuscular and the difficulty in breathing and having all these problems, we must first support with NIV and then, if needed, oxygen. We don't do this reverse, but because this can cause a lot of problems, it can cut off the oxygen, the drive, the central drive, and we have a child who collapses into respiratory failure. So this is a very, 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 very important message that I always tell all my parents, that just giving oxygen, just doing pulse ox is not going to work, right? So what can we do as caregivers? We as I told you, we anticipate. Once you have a diagnosis of whatever condition you have, we anticipate, we identify the risk. We identify whether is it a progressive muscle problem, is your child having so many infections, respiratory tract, non-respiratory tract, is there any problems with the cough, change of voice, any swallowing problems, any choking, because all this is ultimately affecting the respiratory system, right? Each aspiration takes your child into a pneumonia, into a period when he doesn't gain weight. And also we need to check swallowing. How bad is the spine? Is it worsening? Any problems with sleep and other comorbidities need to be assessed each time, right? So when you come to assisted ventilation, like I said, I've just simply put it as NIV BiPAP. BiPAP essentially means bi-level positive airway pressure, where you're assisting the child in inspiration as well as expiration. There's another entity called CPAP, which is continuous positive airway pressure. Most of us don't use it. There are a few targeted patients that we need. And I will not go into that detail, but because 90% of our children actually require BiPAP. So these are pressure targeted pressure, like positive airway pressure. Okay. And we usually give fixed inspiratory times. It's not like a yo-yo that you can give any kind of time. And we use it especially, there are timings that we set on the machine for you. And for older children, we can also have different other machinery that we can use. But to keep it very simple, these are pressure targeted machines. And I've taken it literally off the internet, and there are different types of machine. But all we need to understand is it's a basic BiPAP machine. Doesn't have to be automated, AVPS, cycled, non-cycled. It has to be basic. The mode that we commonly use is spontaneous triggered mode. There has to be a humidifier circuit, ability to connect to oxygen. And in older children, we can use the options that are available in older adults. So they're different machine. Now we have, like, at least I would say in the market 30 to 40 types of BiPAP machines, right? And you can, most of you would be familiar with it, and those are already using it know very well how most of these are simple, lightweight, some of them portable. And before it was extremely expensive 10 years ago, but right now, because we have more in the market, most of these machines are actually affordable. Different types of interfaces. It's just a pictorial diagram. Some children read only nasal pillows, full face, a pediatric mask, different types of material, silicone, gel, and various modifications. Some have chin strap, some have head strap, some are oronasal, some are, so they're different things. And this actually is challenging in children. Okay, so this looks like a very simple interface. This is actually a full face interface. So again, all children will not take to all the interfaces. So sometimes what we do is we get the children to try on different interfaces, because ultimately our success or failure of these devices would depend on the interface. Some are really uncomfortable. Maybe some are pulling at the chin, some are hitting on the head. So different types of interfaces, oronasal, only nasal, and there are different modifications, and there are lots in the market. And most of our children, especially infants, we struggle to find the right interface. But once we find it, and the machine works fantastically, and most of our kids, so this becomes the biggest challenge while doing this ventilation, right? Safety measures, we also must understand there's something called anti-asphyxia valves. Okay, all the masks have it now, because if a child is connected to the machine and suddenly there is no power, there's a ventilatory failure, there has to have some valves that open and the child can breathe normal air, right? Also, children may have risk of vomiting. You're blowing air and half of it is going to the stomach, right? So vomiting, aspiration. A child who's not able to move his limbs not going to be able to move the mask. An infant is not going to be able to do it. So we have to be extremely careful. Those who are on ventilatory support more than 16 hours a day, you have to have backup battery, backup machine, backup of all things. Those who are already established on this home ventilation, we must recheck our settings, adjust our settings. And most of the patients usually come back once a year to check their titrate the ventilator settings, whether the CO2s, the apneas, the carbon dioxide, all that is fine, right? Other safety measures is skin injuries, facial flattening. You have a child who's using this mask all the time. So all this should be checked before. Tracheostomy has to be, if you're considering tracheostomy, then you must know the parents have to be comfortable with it. The sizes of the tube should be very, appropriate, and the child should be comfortable with those tubes, right? And again, humidification. If the air is too hot, too dry, blowing into the child's face, and a child having a lot of secretions, child is not going to tolerate it. Some of them will just pull it off. And of course, when we are doing all the types of physiotherapy and trying to take out secretions, we must make sure that, we have resuscitation bags, right? So when we transition to home ventilation, all hospitals have different protocols, and we also want to ensure that everything is done safely. Okay, so portable devices like I showed you, humidification, battery backup, You have alternate power circuits, right? We even tell our parents that you may have to change the circuit and the wiring of your house sometimes, right? Alarms, all machines have alarms built in, right? So if the volume of the breathing is too low, is this, the machine is disconnected at night, the pressure is too high for the child, power failure. So most of these devices have this, right? Mask has to be absolutely a good fit, because you can give a really nice mask which fits well, but if it's not appropriate for the child, or vice versa, that you have a great machine, everything is good, but the mask is not okay, right? Suction, like I said, electrical, mechanical, we tell parents that you still need to keep some mechanical suctions and catheters at home. Ambu bags for emergency resuscitation, oxygen sources, whether you have oxygen cylinder or concentrator, pulse oximeter, and nebulization kit in some children, right? And then when we prepare you to go home, right, we must understand that it's a new thing for you, it's a new environment, so all caregivers must understand the process. You must feel confident about caring for the child, and this is particularly important if children have come into the ICU, has spent months on the ventilator, tracheostomy, and we're sending them home, and we have caregivers, at least 2 of them know basic CPR, tracheostomy care, how to suction, how to change the tube, in case there's obstruction, what to do. Also, there are some children who require with feeding, help with feeding, G-tubes, physiotherapy, and we also must have clear written plans for you at home that you understand. So if you have some of you have been with us and admitted with us, we would have, our nurses would come and check every day, the home care plan with you before sending you, especially the ones who have come out of critical care, right? And also follow-up plans must be done, and emergency contact numbers, and tie up with the nearest hospital. So basically, there are some of you who don't belong to the city that we are in, right? So we also help to tie up with the doctors that are in different parts of the country to help you with these machines. So follow-up, again, we require intensivists sometimes, we could require ENT team, pulmonologists, or occupational physiotherapists. Regular follow-ups must be, mandated. And of course, any change in the ventilator settings, what is happening? Is the child breathing faster, slower? Do we need sleep studies? Do we need blood gas again? Are we monitoring the growth and the development? And of course, parents, counseling, psychological support, extremely important. I know we all lack in this area, but as much as possible, your primary physicians should be able to help you out to a certain extent in this, right? Contraindications are there, and we must understand if a child has a lot of secretions, cannot manage this at home. Family is not motivated. The patient may not be motivated. The mask is not fitting well, okay? And there are a lot of problems with the interface. Airway reflexes are not good. You're not able to cough out, not choking, and all these things. We need to obviously step up the tracheostomy. And of course, there are some parents and patients, we're not able to comprehend, follow through the plan, a little bit scared, not confident. And the biggest problem, again, poor family resources, accessibility of all medical support in case of emergencies, right? So we have a whole lot of contraindications, but I think 90% of our patients have managed despite of the distance, despite of many other problems we have. So currently we have about 92 patients initiated at our center, and 90% are the non-invasive BiPAP. Maybe 10% are with tracheostomy. We are helping with teleconsultations, remote monitoring, and technology has helped us a lot. And predominantly it's neuromuscular type of patients. We are also publishing our Indian data, maintaining our follow-up registries, and keeping in touch with all our parents, as well as the caregivers. So there are patients from Kerala, there are patients from West Bengal, patients from Andhra. So we are at least trying to link up with the doctors taking care of them directly, so at least they can reach a center where the doctor assesses, and the doctors can call us up, and then we can troubleshoot remotely, because most of these patients would be wheelchair bound. They do not have the resources to fly in, and technically it's quite challenging for these parents, right? So I think we've come a long way. 10 years ago when we started, I really wasn't sure, but really advanced intensive care interventions, better survival, and for morbidity has actually decreased, not increased. There's increasing health costs, hospital-acquired infections, and all this. We need to go back to our family environment so that, less hospital admissions, less interactions, less patients coming into hospital environment, early discharges to home wherever feasible, and we've been able to achieve that completely. I have seen some of my earliest patients live in the hospital for 6 to 7 months. So every year we would get at least one patient who would be with us for 6 to 7 months. So it's a huge burden to the family as well. And we have, of course, improved rehabilitation technology. Home ventilation, I would say, is still safe, feasible, and it is the expected service of parents and patients today. And hats off to the parents and families that are going through all these things that I've discussed. There are some parents here, I know you're watching, and you're going through it on a daily day basis. And really, all respect and all our regards to that family that's going through it, and you all are doing it fantastically, and hats off to you. Really, thank you to the ORDI team, and I'll end my talk here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Rai,
Thank you
for that excellent talk. And we have few questions that have come in.
Yeah.
I'll just go ahead and ask.
Yeah, sure.
Hope I'm audible, and
yes, you're audible. Yes,
also.
Yes.
Yeah. So questions that has come from one parent, Anchal, is that how would parents would decide? I mean, I know you went through the indications of home ventilation, but I mean, how, from a normal regular person perspective, what sort of things they need to look for in day-to-day living? What are sorts of danger signs which should prompt them to go to a doctor for respiratory evaluation?
Okay, so let us say the biggest, most important factor is your primary physician, be it a pediatrician or your neurologist or a pulmonologist, right? Respiratory muscle weakness would show up some way or the other. Some children are coughing, some children are recurrently wheezing, some children are having pneumonias, some children are also having no weight gain, right? Some children also having problems with swallowing, choking with feeds, aspiration, right? So this is really the spectrum that all of us see. There are some children also, they don't have so many problems, yet clinical examination. For example, a child who has absolutely had no problems in the past, but has a very weak cough and gag reflex, which will be elicited only by your doctor. Which means to say, indirectly, your primary physician will have to take the decision, pick up any of those small clinical markers that are evident. The other thing I also said about kids who are extremely restless at night, not sleeping well, like the boy I presented, he was not able to concentrate in the daytime, right? He was a little bit sleepy and tired and fatigued. So basically, it was an indicator that his CO2 levels were also high, right? There are some children who also restless sleep, excessive sweating, mouth breathing. So there are some of these other indications also that that you as a parent can also pick up, and ultimately we will have to rely on your doctors and ask the questions that are really relevant. Again, one more thing here, there are different neuromuscular problems that we are talking about. A child with SMA, a child with DMD, a child with myotonic dystrophy, a child with various other MPS, various types of diseases have different progression level, different levels, different types of presentation, right? So again, it's a question, I cannot give you one blanket answer, but yes, there will be something in your child that will raise an alarm, and similarly that will also raise an alarm with your treating physician. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Aylin.
Yeah.
One more question we have here, and this is offline question. So they are asking that how can we go out of the home with a day ventilation to school or market? We have so much of dust around there. What sort of implication does it have the environment on the kind of ventilation quality?
Okay, so I think the question is, can you go to school with an NIV with a BiPAP? Number one, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And the second is we are worried about the air pollution per se, right?
Yeah.
So I know in my limited experience, I have children with the NIV machine, either on a tracheostomy or with the BiPAP, that they take off intermittently only for suction. They are on a wheelchair and with all the essential, things that they need, go to school for a few hours. Let's say on an average 3 to 4 hours, right? The air quality or the air pollution, I would say, I would just kind of think that, it yes, it makes an impact. But again, what is the interface you're using? Most of our children will probably be using oronasal or a nasal interface. And for that 3 to 4 hours of their class time, I would just say that uh, it won't make so much of an impact unless they're living in industrial zones, heavily polluted, cities or cramped surroundings. I don't think it makes so much of an impact. I think technically it's still feasible, and I'm saying it because few of my patients are going to school like that.
Okay.
Additionally, there is also a stress because one parent or one attendant need to accompany the child to school, right? So that is the additional stress on the family. However, I have seen a few kids do that and they're managing quite well. So I think it is going to be case by case, and the air pollution would really be dependent on where you live. But the 3 to 4 hours, I would still say, I think it's fairly acceptable unless it's really a really heavily polluted area. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Eileen.
Yeah.
So one more question that has come is, do you have any specific recommendation for a BiPAP machine, and what would be a kind of cost for
Okay.
this BiPAP machine?
Yeah. So basically, there is, I'm not speaking on behalf of any company, to be clear, but most parents always have this dilemma of what BiPAP machine. So I'd really put it there clearly. There are about 40 or 50 models of BiPAP. Stick to the most basic one, not the most advanced one, right? Advanced machines are all automated machines and they're ideal for adults. In children, most basic, there's something called the ST mode, which is the spontaneous and triggered mode. All that you need to have is the machine, that ST mode, and you have to have basically a humidifier circuit, and that's it. All that is needed is that for a BiPAP machine. BiPAP machines cost anywhere from, I think, 40, 45 to, the sky's the limit beyond that, right? So even up to a lakh or more. But now most of the machines are like roughly around 45, 50. I think that's the starting rate. There are a lot of, second-hand machines available in the market. And I tell parents also it's worthwhile to explore those options, because at the end of the day, it's just about changing that, the tubing or the circuit that connects to your thing. The machine, as long as it's working, we can still utilize it. Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Eileen.
Yeah.
One more question by parent Jeevan is that they have already completed the sleep study.
Yeah.
Asking, can they just come home and set it up? Or do we need to visit the hospital?
Okay, so this is like a tough question, okay, but let me tell you this. Ideally, the standards of care world over is you should be getting in a hospital setting, doing the BiPAP initiation, right? Like, so we do the mask interface, what is the pressure, we check for blood gas, so many things. So in the real world, and especially in our country, we found it extremely challenging. Even a night admission is challenging, even 2 nights, forget the 3 nights, right? So what we have, most of us now, what I tell parents is, you buy the machine, you make sure that, it's the right machine, first of all. You buy the machine, you have to, obviously, you have to play around with the interfaces. Like a 2-year-old is not straight away going to put one, mask that, it's not a mask that fits all. So you may have to interchange the mask. And I tell parents, first only use the mask at night and let the patient sleep only with the mask, because first of all, it is so uncomfortable, right? So the mask, getting used to a mask may take a few days or even weeks. Once the child is comfortable with a particular mask, then you switch on the machine at very, very basic setting. This whole process may take 4 to 6 weeks, and most kids take 4 to 6 weeks. And then after that, we decide, should we come into the hospital to titrate? Should we wait, or all those decisions? But ideally, in an ideal setting, it's 3 nights of initiation of BiPAP in the hospital. use the machine for 6, 8 weeks, and then come back for BiPAP titration. But like I said, because of paucity of resources, we have children who, I mean, parents who are obviously, it's financially very challenging as well. So we are doing it the reverse way. It's not the ideal way, but it's the best way that we can think of given the current situation. Right now, because of the COVID, we are not even able to do that because every hospital mandates that you be getting a COVID report before you do a sleep study, before you do a BiPAP titration. Hence, even more so now, all the patients that I'm trying to initiate, I have to do it remotely, and that's how we're supporting them. So some of my patients who are from different parts of the country, like there are some patients from Kerala, from this, I tell parents, you will have to show me, you'll have to let me speak to the technician that comes to your house, set it up, get all the settings right, and then they send me the videos of how the child is coping up with this. Do we adjust, do we titrate the settings? And it's not the ideal way, but this is the only way that we can deal with the situation right now. And most parents can't fly in at so frequently, and it's technically very challenging as well. Yeah, I hope that
Thank you,
answered the question. Yeah.
yeah, thank you, Dr. Eileen. So that seals that at least the initiation has to happen in the hospital, and then
Ideally.
subsequently maybe things can be managed at home. We have few more questions coming in, and we do have time with us. One of the question is they have it's from a parent, and they say the frequent chest congestions are always there, and always difficulty in coughing that is there, and we do take a lot of antibiotics. Is it not dangerous that a long-term antibiotic is harmful, and what sort of alternatives are there to avoid this?
Yeah. Thank you for that question, and it's a really, really, really important question. And like the case scenario that I put up with the child was, coming into the ICU, recurrent admissions in the ICU for what? It was for pneumonia, and there was parts of the lung that were collapsing, and the child not able to take out the secretions, right? So this is a very, very, very common condition, either because of aspiration, the child's not swallowing properly, or because these children are not able to effectively cough out, effectively take out their secretions. Whatever mucus gets impacted there becomes a source of the pneumonia and the source of the infection. The treatment for any pneumonia is antibiotics, correct? But why should we be giving so many antibiotics? So the answer is this: if your child is already having so many recurrent issues, you need to ask your doctor, your treating physician, do we do a sleep study and reassess what's happening? Because most of our children we have initiated on the sleep study, like I said in one of my slides, quality of life, prevent the morbidity. The morbidity is essentially mostly respiratory, frequent pneumonias, coming into hospital, multiple courses of antibiotics, and multiple courses of antibiotics, after a while it's just not going to work, right? And I mean, in the long run we might be harming the child as well. So basically, we just have to understand that if a child has already had so many pneumonias, having difficulty in taking out secretions or coughing it out or expectorating despite your best chest physiotherapy, despite your bronchodilators, nebulization, and you having had to give your so many antibiotics, then the only other way is one, sleep study. You can't do it. Then we need to check whether we need to do some blood gases, your carbon dioxide, the oxygen levels, and at least some basic, baseline oximetry or something, test like that, which does not replace the gold standard, which is the polysomnography. But some of these things can be done, and once your child is on BiPAP, the effective, the BiPAP is aiding your child in bringing out the secretions, in opening up the collapsed airways, in taking that oxygen, that carbon dioxide, that the yo-yo that's happening, and even the pneumonias, all these recurrent infections, the ICU, everything. I would say it will just do wonders to your child if that is the if your child is put on BiPAP.
Thank you, Dr. Eileen. Few more questions we have. One is, so this BiPAP or home ventilation, is it going to be lifelong, or does it come off after some time? What has been your experience of prescribing this home ventilation for people, and have people come off the home ventilation?
Okay, so yeah, actually, I wanted to put up my data of our patients, but I decided not to because, again, it gets a little bit sensitive. Of the children that have come off the BiPAP, okay, we have to look at two types of problems here. One is the progressive illness, one is a non-progressive illness, okay. The children that have come off my BiPAP machines or thing have been those children with chronic lung and not progressing further. Some children with cardiac and a heart lung problem, right? And there are some children with very minimal restrictive lung problems. So it's essentially to do, it's not the nerve, it's not the muscle, but essentially with some of these children and some children who had severe kyphoscoliosis, the scoliosis and the kyphoscoliosis, the spine problem, and who were operated, the rigid spine syndrome, and then they were able to come off the coil. So their pathology or their illness was completely different. The rest of the children who are still on BiPAP or who will still continue to use BiPAP are unfortunately the neuromuscular. Okay, so it is SMA, the DMD, the ones that have a kind of a progressive kind of muscular or a neuromuscular issue. So these are the MPS where we still have all of us know how there are so many children who are on drug trials. There are so many children on different types of gene replacement, drug trials, all this. So hopefully, I would just say hopefully those are the category that would really need a drug that will help them, quickly kind of stem the process, stop the process of that progressive worsening, and be able to get off the BiPAP. So the children that have come off BiPAP with me are really the children with other, like the airway, severe tracheobronchoplasia, who have already had the surgery, the rigid spine syndrome, already the spine got corrected, the lung and the heart problems that were, that required that management, the child to grow and then, be able to come out of it. So the rest, yes, they're still struggling, we're still having problems, but 90% of them have shown improvement in weight gain, improvement in coming to hospital, the ICU admissions, the aspiration problems, just the entire morbidity and the mortality associated with this, I would say fantastic improvement. And like I would just say I won't take credit for it, but I just feel so happy when I see that dramatic change. I don't think some of my parents are here on board and know it's a big thing to not come to the hospital for 1 year. It's a big thing not to get admitted for one pneumonia after starting BiPAP. I think for me that's a big achievement. The underlying disease, the underlying problem, again, it's tough to comment about that unless we have 100% cures for those particular conditions. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Eileen.
Yeah.
That was very lucid. One more question we have is, what's your opinion on alternative medicines for chest condition, especially Ayurveda is going on, homeopathy. They specifically say our medicine works specifically for lung problems, asthma issues, and all. What's your opinion or take? Whether people should take them, or do you recommend?
See, unfortunately, being an allopathic doctor, I can't advocate all of those. And I would just say that, to each its own. There are some parents who have come back and told me, doctor, we're doing Ayurveda or homeopathy, and it's doing very well for my child. I would still say continue my allopathic medications also with it, and the BiPAP and whatever else, the chest physio. And if you wish to continue that, if it's not harming your child, continue. But if you feel that your child's losing weight, the respiratory infections are more, it's hampering something or the other, then you need to stop. Because Ayurveda and all these homeopathy and all, I really can't comment on it because I don't know what are the contents of that medication. But definitely, I have so many parents who come back and say, we have tried this, it seems to be working, and they're quite happy and satisfied with the progress. So on one hand, there is no way for me to measure it, right? I can't say, oh, now, because you gave Ayurveda, now your kid is improving, right? But for that parent, they feel, oh, the child's able to take out the phlegm, the child's chest infection is better, and all that thing is better. So it's a little bit of a delicate topic, but I tell my parents that, and I'm telling you that whether I would say please go ahead and do it, I wouldn't be that one. But if it's working for your child with no new problems or additional problems, then I think should be fine. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Eileen. So one more question we have from Geeta is that will everyday nebulization affect child? So I mean, is it like everyday nebulization? Is it an indication of something else, or is it something that's routinely done?
Okay. So let me just put it very, very simply. Okay, what are the medicines that we are giving for nebulization? There are two types of medicines that we are giving for nebulization. Okay, one we call the bronchodilators, and one we are calling the preventive or the anti-inflammatory, like in a way. So the bronchodilators are immediate relievers of any kind of cough. Example: Livolin, Astelin, Deolin, Ipravent, and all of you would be familiar with these drugs: Astelin, Deolin, Livolin, and all these medicines. So they provide, for example, a drug like Astelin works within 5 to 10 minutes, get into the airway, and the effects last for 4 hours. It opens the airway, but the chances of it working longer than 4 hours is very minimal. But why do we give it? We want to open up all that alveoli that is filled, the balloons inside the lung that are filled with phlegm. Okay, so it is, and these are the medicines that are used in cough syrups, all the cough medications, like you'll hear of lot Ambroxol and all these kind of medicines, Ambrodil S and all these. These are the medicines in it, right? The safety of it is to be used as and when you need it, right? The second set of medications are the anti-inflammatory, the preventive medications, which are like Budecort, Flohale, budesonide, Foracort. And again, this set of medicines is different. They take time to work into the system, and what exactly it does is taking out all the phlegm inside. Most of these drugs, the preventive medications, minimum 2 to 3 weeks you have to keep on for it to fully work. So what are the indications of giving it? Let us say I had a child with pneumonia and a lot of, coughing, congestion, phlegm kind of situation. I would give Astelin or Livolin or Deolin for a few days, 3 to 4 days, every 4 hourly, 6 hourly, SOS when you need, and 3 to 4 hourly because that's the time the drug works, the time frame in which the drug, and 3-4 days and you're off. The Budecort, the Flohale, I put a long term. If a child, let's say, has recurrent aspirations, recurrent issues with the lung, recurrent wheezing, which means to say that underlying lung is not okay. There is something that's triggering it very easily. So those nebulizations, like for Flohale, Budecort, I would continue some of children even for months if needed, right? The third aspect is there are some children not able to cough out. So we need to do physiotherapy, we need to nebulize. We also sometimes need to add saline, 3% saline to thin out the secretions, and then give this physiotherapy, do the physiotherapy to bring the phlegm out. Because if the phlegm is stuck inside, few days child is okay, antibiotics, nebula, and then again come back. Few days, so it's an endless vicious cycle. So the indications should be clear why you're giving it. Okay, there is no harm in giving Budecort for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, or the Foracort or the Flohale. But to give Livolin every day for that much time, in most cases, it's not warranted. Most cases, your pediatrician or your doctor would say give Livolin and Astelin like 3-4 days when there's a flare, and then you can stop. 3-4 days, or when your child's having difficulty taking out the phlegm or the sputum, or so this will not harm your child. But the indications for it, you can't just say, oh, I will give Budecort for 3 days and then it's over. It doesn't work like that anyway. So I've told you about 2 different types of medicines, one to be given only SOS or as needed or with physio, and one if you give minimum 2 to 3 weeks to up to months, and that again not going to harm your child. I hope this answered the question that you had, Geeta.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Eileen. We have 5 more minutes maximum.
Okay. Yeah.
And then we have 2 more questions. We are going to probably wind up. 6 o'clock we'll wind up. 2 more questions. Yeah. One question we have is, what sort of implication are there for home ventilation, especially in COVID-19 situation? Are there any specific precautions that one should take, being rare disease patients, being the high risk category people? And you have also stressed that the initiation has to happen in the hospital, and there is a lot of problem that we are having, that patients are unable to reach, especially if they are non-COVID, they are having really tough time right now. So what sort of message you want to send?
Okay, so for the child who's on home ventilation already at home, the usual, if so basically what we are telling parents is you have to continue using your BiPAP, your home, continue using your regular medications. The caretaker must, whoever is taking care of you, removing masks, feeding you, taking care of the child, all those, the extra precautions of hand wash, masking. When you're doing nebulization, make sure it's in a ventilated area, because this is where we fear that there might be some aerosol spread. The caretaker, caregiver, whoever is taking care of you, minimal contact to the outside world as well, right? So when you're going out, you're wearing proper mask, shield, because there has to be a person who's going out to get the groceries, getting the food, getting the medicine. So again, so this one is really important, because most of our children would be home. It's the caregiver that may contact somebody with COVID and then have problems. So as much as possible, that the social distancing, the masking, the sanitization, all that must continue. We also advise all children who are really homebound, like your space, which includes your eating, breathing, sleeping, all this space should be sanitized and kept as clean as possible, because we don't want surfaces like your mask or your ventilator, your circuits and your machines, any of these things being infected by somebody else touching it. So as long as your caregiver is doing your best, and you yourself also trying, I mean, in older children, in younger children of course is very difficult. I think this is very important. We also advise, as much as possible, even within the house, please wear mask. Even if it's a cloth mask, please wear it, because something is better than nothing in this kind of COVID situation, right? So this is for the COVID. The home, some of these patients not reaching hospitals, yes, it has become a little bit technically challenging to get our kids to initiate and everything. But like I said, we are all trying. So many doctors all over India. We have Dr. Sagar in Mumbai, Dr. Ankit in Delhi. There's another doctor in Chennai. So we are all networking together, so that, let's say a child needs something at home, a BiPAP initiation at home, at least we are able to connect to the right technician, the right thing, the right setting, because we got to use our technology. We have no choice right now, right? Some children are not able to do a sleep study. So even in them, there are some children I've said, let's initiate, let's do what we can right now, because by the time we get you to come to the hospital to a sleep study, we may be running out of a lot of time and getting into more problems. So if there is a problem, please seek help, video consults, or reaching out to your primary doctors as soon as possible. And once that is taken care of, your doctor is saying it's not a major issue, not a major problem, everything else can be worked out. And believe me, I think technology is helping each one of us, from WhatsApp to the video consulting to everything is feasible. I don't think we should be having a problem there.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Eileen. That's all the time for today. Thanks a lot for coming and sharing your time, your experience with us. And I really thank all the viewers for providing excellent questions, those that are relevant, contemporary. And we'll see you for the next Care for Rare webinar series. Do sign up for the next one. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Eileen.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sudhindra.
Thank you, Prasanna.
Thank you. Thank you to the ORDI team and Mr. Prasanna. Thank you for this initiative.
Bye.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, doctor.